I'm your host, David, and welcome to a special edition of the Cold War Channel. Today, I'm joined by our special guest, Sergei Sputnikov from the Ushanka Show. Sergei has been with us a couple of times now, which has been fantastic, very informative and entertaining and really fun for myself. And we thought for today's episode that we would actually talk a little bit about something that I know a lot of people out there have a lot of interest in, and that's automobiles, cars, and what cars were like in the Soviet Union. And not just the cars themselves, but the process of just getting a car, and owning a car, and sort of what all of that entailed. So Sergei, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Obviously, as someone who grew up in the West, the idea of car ownership is something that's
obvious.
It's obvious. I mean, it's in Canada, it's everybody, unless you live in a really major urban center, it's almost assumed that you have a car or have access to a car. But that really wasn't the case, especially in the Soviet Union. Having a car was something that you could get, but it took a lot of time, correct?
That's correct. And of course, it depends. We had several brands, believe it or not. And the most desirable car was VAZ Zhiguli. They had a name Lada. And just in detail, Zhiguli is like an area in the Soviet Union and Povolzhye area. But when they decided to export car to the foreign markets, they realized that Zhiguli sounds like gigolo. So it's one of those cases when in different languages the name is no good. I remember reading something about similar situation with Chevy Nova. When they tried to sell it in Mexico, they couldn't sell because in Spanish Nova means no go.
Right.
So buying a car, so they come up with Lada as the export name for the Zhigulis. Otherwise, we always call them Zhiguli. That's the everyday name for Vaz. And every Soviet brand, you can't sell it really branded, was a factory. So AZ in every name, so always car called be like Vaz Zhiguli. So Vaz is a Volga Automotive Zavod. Zavod is a factory. So AZ always stands for Automobile Zavod, Automobile Factory. So you have Vaz Zhiguli, that was the one that everyone wanted really. Then you had ZAZ, Zaporozhets, that's Ukrainian-made car. Those were not as popular, but we had quite a few of them. Well, there was a Soviet version of Porsche. It was a rear-engine, air-cooled car, and that's pretty much when it ends related to Porsche. But those they were popular because government actually had a special program for military veterans that were handicapped. So they modified the Zaporozhets into hand-operated shifters. So a lot of people were getting for free.
Okay.
And quite often then they transferred their kids. So like in the village I spent summers, we had a guy who, he wasn't missing limbs, but I think he got hurt during the war. So then in early 80s, he got a car for free, and I was the only guy I knew that had a car in that area. But VAZ, so Zhiguli, my family never owned a car.
Okay.
But my mother, I remember one day when I was probably maybe like 8th or 9th grade, she came from work and she was like very proud. She's like, today I put you on a waiting list. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, we have a waiting list for Ladas in our place of work. And it takes about 9 years for you to get your turn to buy a car. So prices were pretty high. So in the 80s, regular Zhiguli car Lada was about 9,000 rubles. We're talking average salary 150 rubles a month. A lot of money. I actually tried to do math, and if you compare what, for example, Soviet engineer was making 130 rubles a month, and you look what American engineer makes, so the price of Zhiguli, they'll be almost close to price of Lamborghini. So this is, we're talking about waiting 9 years and paying the price of Lamborghini to get this basic car that was based on 1960s design of Fiat 124. I mean, I know a lot of people know it, a lot of people don't, but in this case, Soviet Union decided, why would we waste our time and money designing a car? We can just shop around, and we purchased the whole factory and design. So I think competition was between Ford and Fiat, and Fiat won. So they sold at that time they were designing new generation. Right. So they just sold the old generation equipment and the whole design to Soviets. And this is how we got Ladas. And
for those who may be interested, Fiat stands for, in this case, I guess it's fix it again, Tavarish.
Tavarish, yeah. It was Tony became a Tavarish. That's correct. So 9 years of waiting, and then you have to pay 9,000 rubles to buy it. So she said, that's a perfect plan. We have enough time to save money. At that time, you'll finish college, you probably get married, there'll be your turn to buy a car, and that'll be fantastic. So it was a great plan. But Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, that list disappeared, and then we just got flooded with cheap second-hand cars from Europe, and people realized that 10-year-old Ford Scorpio or Ford Fiesta or Opel Kadett was better than brand new Lada, and after that no one was on the waiting list for the Ladas.
So what would happen if your name gets put on the list, and right, you have 10 years to save the money, your name comes up next on the list and you don't have the money? What would happen in that situation?
Well, probably you can resell your rights to somebody who's desperate to buy a car. We had people who had money in Soviet Union. If you have money, like cash, in any society, sooner or later there'll be people who are going to have money and who are going to have a lot of money. So in our case, Georgians, people from Georgia, not Georgia, America, Georgia. And the reason I'm saying that, because when Russia had a conflict with Georgia several years ago, when the American newspapers and TV announced that Russia attacked Georgia, all the neighboring states around Georgia, they sold off all the weapons and ammunition. And that's a true story. You can check it out. When I heard that Russia attacked Georgia, I'm not good with American geography, but whatever the states around, there's a lot of people who freaked out and they ran to the local ammo stores and they bought all the ammo to get ready for their state to be attacked by Russia.
Florida, we're looking at you.
There's a possibility. So Georgians, they were doing really well because there was one of the republics that had a nice climate to grow oranges, pomegranates, and all the other exotic fruits, which we couldn't grow in Ukraine or Russia. So they kind of monopolized the market. So if you want fresh orange or maybe cucumbers for the new year or tomatoes, the only way you could buy it is to go to bazaar. So we have these open air markets, and they will sell it, but you need to arm and a leg and another arm. It was very expensive. So they were making killing, so I had no problem to overpay. So you can actually sell your rights for people had no problem to pay if you have 15 or 12,000 rubles or 15,000 rubles for the $9,000 car, so they don't have to wait 9 years. So that was quite a common occurrence that you can just buy a car and turn around and resell it right away to somebody who wants it for more money.
But then at that point, you'd be putting your name back on. You'd go back to the bottom of the list, essentially.
If you want to, yes. Yeah. That's correct. Or you can go for the other car that may be not that desirable and less waiting list. Some of them, I'm not sure how long Moskvich, some Moskvich were available right away, but there was still like 7,000 rubles, still a lot of money. So you can sell your right for Lada, and the money you made on the top of it, you just turn around and buy a less desirable car and have it.
Like a Zaporozhets.
Yeah, it's like a Ukrainian Porsche. That's correct.
Fun fact for anybody who's interested, and you can Google pictures of this, the first car that Vladimir Putin ever owned was a Zaporozhets.
That's correct, yeah, he is. Hey, that guy that I said, that the military invalid that had the Zaporozhye in the village, he invited me for a ride quite often. He always was driving around the villages to see who has vodka, because maybe our village, our store is out of vodka, but this next will be. So people couldn't just, be too hard to ride the bicycle 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. So that was his kind of project. He would just hop in the car like, hey, kiddo, you want to go for a ride? Sure. So you go stop there, buy something if it's available, and cruise around. And so that was fun.
So what type of status was attached to car ownership, or was there status attached to car ownership?
Oh, definitely. I mean, if you own Lamborghini, you show your status. If you paid cash for Lamborghini, that's, if a family has a car, apartment, and maybe dacha, this is pretty much top Soviet dream. Was it great? Life in Soviet Union, was it terrible? So even people who lived in Soviet Union have different opinions, which is kind of strange to me. But there's stories that the people, apparently we had a special waiting list for special people. So if you're a veteran of World War II, they had a special waiting list that was shorter. So maybe instead of 9 years, it's only 2 or 3 years.
Okay.
Maybe there's some jobs that they, like if you're a military officer, they had their military officers waiting list. Actually, if you're a military officer and you serve like in East Germany or Hungary, quite often they would buy export variations of Lada cars and bring them back. Those were even more desirable because they had some bells and whistles that didn't come for the market in the Soviet Union. So export version, if you bring it back, that was the best because it had extra for the like spoilers, extra parts inside. So those would be like they'll buy even better car than a regular Lada.
Interesting.
So otherwise, if you will look at the Soviet cars, like for the scale, I would say we'll start with ZAZ Zaporozhets. That was the most basic. I said air-cooled rear engine. For a while they were making model, we called it Ushasty, so the one with the ears, if you translate. So it had ear intakes on the side, and it looked like ears. So there was the Ushasty nickname because then they made more slim-looking car. I think it was 968M model. So it has like a little just cutouts in the rear trunk for the air. But then they ran a problem, it's in rear, so the cabin is blocking airflow when you're driving. So the car engine wasn't getting enough air to cool it off. So the engines were overheating, you'd have to park and wait. So people actually started adding this little air intake so that instead of ears, it was just this homemade metal, almost like exhaust for the, for your stove. But that piece they will just weld or screw in on the top to improve, and that was kind of funny to see. There's almost like a snorkel, and for the submarine there'll be this little air intake sticking out in the back for that car. Then from ZAZ Zaporozhets, we probably will say AZLK. Now that this is hard because it's the name of the Автомобильный завод, where once again with AZ Автомобильный завод, but then LK it's some leader. Right now it come up, you guys can look it up, but it's a Kuibyshev or имени Likhacheva, maybe it's a Likhachev, so it's one of the leaders of the Soviet Union. So that Moskvich was produced in Moscow. That factory shut down now, it's not existing anymore, it's a shopping center or some development there. So that car was a Soviet design, wasn't as bad as Zaporozhets, it wasn't as good as Lada, of course. My cousin owned one of those, and I know he was constantly working on it, so it was always some kind of repairs.
Lots of home repairs too, right?
Yes, and actually, some people are asking me, like, if you visit Soviet Union, now it's changing, but Soviet Union and right after collapse, if you go in any big city, you'll see a lot of these ugly metal buildings, rows of them, like any empty areas, you'll see these garages. It's what it is. So when you buy a car for the price of Lamborghini, you don't want to have it parked on the street by your building, right?
Right.
So that's while you're waiting on the waiting list to buy a car, or if you bought a car, it's the next project right away, you need to find a spot for garage. And of course, in Soviet Union, government wasn't interested in manufacturing garages. They all look random, weird, so you just go and find buddies who work with metal and they will borrow from the factory some sheets of metal and just weld some kind of basic, almost look like metal tent with the door big enough to fit car in there. And that's so there was always, it's still a lot of it around, but now that property became so valuable, like in Moscow, the night of the lawn excavator arms, because at night they'll bring excavators and they'll just start destroying these garages. Because now that property, like in center of Moscow, we have this acre of these ugly garages that's suddenly worth millions of dollars. And of course, during the Soviet Union, you couldn't own property. So like it's your garage on the Soviet property. So you don't really,
there's no legal ownership to the land.
yeah. So it's pretty much, once they wait, if they can't make people agree, they're like, too bad, we bought this land, so we're just gonna bring an excavator, and at night they just start destroying all this. And quite often, there's another new cultural phenomena in post-Soviet cities is so-called garage finds. Like here in America, maybe in Canada, you have barn finds. Some old farmer passed away, you open the barn, and there's some unique cars from way back covered with that much dust and chicken poop and stuff like that, right? Well, in Soviet Union now they have this term garage find, because they come in to destroy garage and they open it, they break the locks, and owner died 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and grandma forgot about it. And this car was sitting there, sometimes with like 10,000 kilometers on it or less, still has original license plate from Soviet Union. So they pulled them out, and now it's cool again, okay? It just goes in circles, right? So in beginning of 90s, no one wanted Soviet Ladas, everyone wanted to use BMW or Mercedes. Now that's not cool if you have a Soviet Lada that you can fix and make it look original, or you make a lowrider. I mean, they do everything there now with cars. Like here, they customize, they chop them down, they lower them. It's insane. So they go after these garage finds. It's a big thing. It's grandpa's garage, and you find this car that's original so many miles and license plate, and there's some, I guess, will be some modification they made only this year. So many of these cars, but then they realize they don't have that part anymore because the factory in Hungary couldn't make them.
Right.
So this is unique. So I was like, I never knew we have this type of situation. So yeah, this is what's going on right now in Moscow, Kiev, all big cities. They destroy these garages and they got these garage finds. So if we keep on moving on the list, so we just talked about Lada. Another detail about Ladas. We can look at the technical specs. I don't remember. There's not a lot of horsepower in that car.
No.
I mean, it's a car from 60s from Italy, right? But it was a new kind of design for the Soviet drivers. It was, they call it fish tank. It was a taller cabin with large glass. So what it did, people started crashing a lot in those cars. Because when you drive a little car with little windows, with the loud engine, it makes you feel like you go super fast. Now you have a car that drives way quieter with big windows, so you have this speed factor disappear. You don't look at speedometer, you just feel the speed.
Yep.
And people just overestimate their speed. They think they go way slower, and then a sharp turn and they go in a ditch. So that was I remember reading first issue problem with the Ladas. They were too good because they were too quiet and they made this false perception of your speed. And a lot of people died in the car accidents because they were just going way over too fast, and the roads weren't designed for smooth turns, so there was a lot of crashes from that.
As someone who's ridden in quite a number of different Ladas, I find it actually really remarkable to say that anybody would thought that it was too good, but...
Right, well, you guys had Ladas shipped from Soviet Union.
My wife's father was a proud owner of a Lada here in Toronto during the 80s. And I believe the universal reaction to him bringing a Lada home was, why?
Really?
So,
I know in Great Britain they advertised, why would you can buy a new car for the price of used one if you buy a Lada. So that was that's interesting. So now we move up the ladder. So next we're talking about GAZ Volga. So Volga, you couldn't really buy it to have it privately. There were ways, only if it was decommissioned. So for example, there was usually all the Soviet bureaucracy, if you were director of the factory, if you're communist leader, not the highest level,
Yep.
middle level, it comes with Volga. Usually black. We like black, it's solid. It means like respectable color. So then, of course, after so many kilometers on the car, it might say, okay, it's time to retire, decommission, and then, of course, the people be waiting to buy that.
There'd be a competition for, like,
Right. So otherwise, like, to go, another thing people ask me, so did you have dealerships? It's like, understanding the whole concept. There's no dealership. We had this receiving center that just, the shipment comes from factory, and they just on the phone, like, okay, Comrade Ivanov, Petrenko, and then on a list from numbers from 1952, they can show up, and they need to go take their cash, go to the bank, pay the cash, take the paperwork that they paid the cash, go to another company, register they bought the car, then come with those papers to us and get their car. So that was the process. So Volga, they even didn't have it all, because there'll be leaders, and then also Volgas were used for taxi service.
Okay.
That was because it was roomy, big. They had this funky yellow color, usually. So you see it's taxi, and that could be a separate video about the taxi drivers, because those were one of the richest people in the country. They were taxi drivers. They could make in one day pretty much what the Soviet engineer makes in a month. But since the taxi service, they put a lot of kilometers on them. So then once again, there will be the commission, and then people will snatch those up. And the top of the chain will be Zil, Chaika. And we're talking about big guys.
Party leaders.
It's a party leaders, like we're talking Republican level, or the like Moscow top leaders. That would be Chaika.
Like central committee members.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Or they also provided some for rent for the weddings. So if you really can pull some strings and find, they can rent Chaika, because I remember there will be Chaikas. Those will be white. Of course, party leaders will have black.
Right.
But the white one will be like the color of the wedding dress, right? So they'll be part of this driving together to Zags. So when you marry in Soviet Union, you don't go to church. It's a no-no. But you have to go to Zags, and it says official agency. When you register your marriage, then you sign, your witnesses sign as official presentation. That's what you get together. You drive to Zags, you make it official, sign papers, then you go and celebrate, have a party. And then if you're religious, then quietly, maybe months later, you sneak in some small church and you just quietly do your blessing, but otherwise it was not a good thing. So this is how the cars worked: Zaporozhets, Moskvich, Lada, Volga, and Chaika. And then, of course, we had a specialty car called Invalidka. And that's worse than Trabant, or maybe a level of Trabant. It's just a little lawnmower engine, 2-cycle or 1-cycle or half-cycle, I don't know. And that was the car given away for handicapped people. It was specifically designed just for that purpose. It's a little tiny car, little tiny 2-seater, and all manual controls on the steering wheel. And that was just pretty much looked like somebody welded a couple pieces of metal, stuck the engine like a find. Those, you could hear them from far away, because they were just horrible. Just sounded very close to Trabant, if you're familiar with Trabant.
Hear them and smell them, probably.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Gotta add oil and with gas to mix it up.
Exactly. Speaking of Trabant, for those who may not know, Trabant was the notorious East German designed vehicle that literally had a 2-stroke, almost like a lawnmower engine in it. And it has been dubbed the worst car ever made. Was it at all possible that you could see Trabants or Dacia or Skodas brought in from other Eastern Bloc countries?
Well, surprisingly, that we didn't import any. Like, if you see some car, like you mentioned, there may be some tourists. Definitely, Trabants couldn't make that far from East Germany, so we never saw those at all. And I think their body was like made out of plastic too. I mean,
it was called I think it's Duraplast. It's
like
cotton, and it's laminated cotton sheets.
Right. So yeah, we didn't import any cars from socialist countries, and we didn't import any foreign cars too. Later, they made some exclusions, like Vysotsky, famous singer. They call him Bardy, so he plays guitar and sings his own songs. They let him bring some Mercedes. I think he owned the very first Mercedes, like privately in the Soviet Union. They might have some import cars for movies. Like you have to make a movie about America, so you gotta have some cars that, shows America. Then, of course, Comrade Leonid Brezhnev was a big fan of powerful American cars, so I think they made exclusion there. So he had a couple cars, but otherwise no imports. We had only our own cars. Now, like buses and everything else, we import some of those, like Icarus from, I believe it was Hungary, and those are very popular and they were really good buses.
Icarus, I think, was the
Icarus,
buses.
yeah. You say Icarus.
Yeah, when I lived in Hungary, I spent an awful lot of time riding on Icarus buses. So,
I mean, there is some positives of public transportation. Like I never worried about snowstorms or anything like that, because you just walk at the bus station. That's a driver's problem, handling the weather. Here, like, oh my goodness, the road's gonna be bad. Like I never had that problem before, because I walked to school. Like when my kids complain about school, I always like, okay, you need to remember that your father went to school every Saturday, and I walked to school every single day. I never seen anyone delivering kids in cars. Cars were so special that you don't do that for these errands. Maybe if you go down to Crimea for vacation, maybe you go to your dacha. Like a lot of car owners, if winter comes, it goes in the garage. Because salt on the roads, you don't want them get rusty. You want your car last 10, 20, 30 years. So it's only summer, good weather car. Yeah. Winter comes, they'll go back to public transportation. They park their cars in garages, lock them up. And
now, what was? Do you recall what the experience of trying to perform maintenance? Were there garages? Were there
parts? Were apparently, since I never owned the car in my family, I never cared about gas prices or parts. But there's a question. So picture Soviet highway. Cars driving, it's not busy. There's another beauty about Soviet Union. We didn't have a traffic jams or anything like that. It was no morning traffic rush or anything like that. If you look at pictures of Soviet Union big cities, even Moscow, like downtown, it's like hardly any vehicles. It's always empty. So it tells you there are not many people on the cars, right? But there'll be really interesting situations. So like cars driving, suddenly rain started coming down. So what do you think a Soviet driver would do when the rain started coming down? What Canadian would do? If you drive your car, it started raining, what would you do?
Put my windshield wipers on and keep driving.
Like, what do you mean you put your winter wipers on?
Well, in my car, because I drive a Japanese car, I've got there's a handle on the stick on the... I
turn them on, right?
Absolutely.
While Soviet driver first need to pull off the side of the road, then he need to remove his wipers out of his glove compartment, put them on, then he puts them on. Because if you leave your wipers on your car, they'll get stolen almost instantly, because one of the shortages was even wipers. So if you look very closely at the pictures of the Soviet cars, if you see them close, you will see they're all missing. It will be just the fingers or whatever that part is called. There'll be no wipers, because no driver would have wipers on, because they will get snatched away instantly. So that's kind of thing. Like if you see movie about Soviet Union and it's raining, they'll turn the wiper. I'm like, no, you need to pull over, put the wipers on. No one will have wipers on the car. And actually, I read the story about one taxi driver. He just became a taxi driver, and it was his first day on the job, and it started raining. And of course, there's no cell phones, and he couldn't drive because there was no wipers on the car. And then when he finally made it back to the park with all the taxi drivers, he's like, where's the wipers? He's like, that's in the glove compartment. He's like, what? Like, yeah, you don't want to get stolen. You only put them on when it's raining.
That's so funny.
So parts were really in short supply. So people did a lot of repairs themselves. And it's pretty much this term capitalny remont, capital repairs. So it's pretty much you take a car apart, you work the engine, you work transmission. Here, no one does it because it's cheaper to buy a new car for the cost of labor. Yeah. Over there, it was a classic. You do your 50,000 kilometers, you work your car, you take it all apart, you work the cylinders, you work everything, put it all together, then you could go for another 50,000.
That's I don't even think I could even possibly begin to know where to start that. So,
and another detail, like what is the problem right now, because we still have Soviet built housing, right, in cities. I need to find out more because Soviet architects probably had some kind of formula. So you have this 16-story high apartment building, about 10 apartments on each level. So we're talking 160 apartments. They have a parking spot for like maybe 6 cars. So there was a formula how many Soviet citizens would own the car, and that's how there'll be the parking. So now, since almost everyone has a car, or a lot of people, it's a horrible shortage of parking because now cars are not that expensive, not that valuable, so people don't mind to leave them parked by the house, but there is nowhere to park. So you will see they occupy anywhere they can find spot, on the sidewalks, on the grass. It's really parking situation now, which is because all this heritage of Soviet,
right,
no car ownership to everyone has a car. So it's quite a challenge for people. And of course, then garages get demolished because of the values of property, of the land. So it's a challenge now too, but definitely way more people own cars than back in the Soviet Union.
Interesting. Do you recall, I know your family didn't have a car themselves, but do you recall what the process of getting a driver's license was like?
I know a little bit about it because when I was in the 9th or 10th grade, we had so-called labor training.
Okay.
So one day we would leave the school and go to a special, I won't say company, but there was a training facility, and you could pick what professions you want to learn. Of course, everyone wanted to be a driver because this is the way you could get driver's license like way early. But of course, there was a shortage. If you have 100 kids, everyone wants to be a driver. So I went to do metal work, which is whatever was available. But it was way more intense. You had to know how the car works.
Okay.
Not just the rules, of driving. Like you need to know how transmission works. Like they will have a questionnaire. You need to ask they'll ask you all these questions like mechanics. Besides knowledge, what you do if you're in this lane and there's cars come on this and this light is on. So it was way, way more complicated. You had to attend courses and sit in class, get through all that. So it was pretty intense.
Interesting. Do you feel that this is maybe a bias is okay in this question. Do you feel that Soviet drivers were better drivers as a result?
It's possibility because definitely you don't have. Better could be they were younger, not as. So it was safer in somewhat because Soviet drivers would be people who managed to get money, managed to get a car. So you don't have crazy teenagers that just drive like. You don't have cars without drivers. Like my first impression coming to America, I see these Buicks or giant Cadillacs that have no drivers. It's like I see empty car because this old person driving behind the steering wheel. You don't see, and we don't have old people driving, so that was safe from that part. But because the roads only mostly 2-lane roads, so it was a lot of car crashes because people trying to pass other people, and so it's dangerous. Yeah. And of course, drunk driving was a pretty bad issue. But for example, in Soviet Union, if you're trying to buckle up, you kind of hurt feelings of the driver because you send him a message, you're a bad driver, I don't trust you, so I'll buckle up. And this is still quite a bit of it because I come home and trying to buckle up and they're looking at me like, what are you doing? Like if you think it's gonna beep, don't worry about it, I have a special plug. So you can purchase special plugs, and some of them has like a religious saying says, God is watching over me. And you just click in your belt connector, so the car thinks you buckled up,
right? And
you just drive. Or they just cut once on the back completely. One time I remember me and my wife, she's American, We're trying to buckle up on the back seat. He's like, "What are you doing?" I cut them off a long time ago. They're just on the way.
And there you have it.
Yeah.
Well, Sergey, thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a really interesting talk on something that I know a lot of people out in YouTube world have a lot of interest in. It's something that I am interested in myself. I think it's quite interesting to see how the automotive, not just the automotive industry, but just how the process of getting a car in the Soviet Union, what was involved sort of even after you had a car. There's different levels. It's quite a fascinating and interesting topic. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Join it. So I'm your host, David. This has been the Cold War Channel, special edition with our friend Sergey Sputnikov from the Ushanka Show. Make sure to check out his show on YouTube. He's got quite a number of videos out there that are fascinating, more lines along this type of information and commentary about life in the Soviet Union. So thank you very much and keep watching.